Power lies in self-command. Have you ever noticed how some people are impossible to use? Not loud, not aggressive, not constantly asserting dominance. Yet somehow, nobody pushes them. Nobody drains them. Nobody dumps responsibility on them or crosses their boundaries twice. They don't explain themselves. They don't chase approval. They don't react emotionally when tested. And slowly, quietly, people learn something about them. This person is not available for manipulation. That's what we're talking about today. Not power that screams, power that blocks access. Because being impossible to use isn't about becoming cold or selfish. It's about becoming psychologically expensive to exploit. Let's break down how these people think and why their mindset makes manipulation fail before it even begins. Most people get used because they are predictable. They react fast. They feel guilty easily. They try to be fair. They hate disappointing others. And manipulators don't need strength to control someone like that. They just need timing. They create urgency. They apply emotional pressure. They imply obligation. Just this once. You're the only one I can count on. I thought you were different. And if you don't have internal structure, you fold. Not because you're weak, but because you're unprotected. People who are impossible to use think differently. They don't start from emotion, they start from self-trust. They assume their needs matter by default. That alone changes everything. Because when you believe your time, energy, and attention are valuable, you stop giving them away to people who haven't earned access. The first psychological trait they have is this: they don't rush to respond. Manipulation thrives on speed. Pressure only works when you react immediately. That's why guilt always sounds urgent. That's why shame demands an instant answer. That's why control tries to close the gap between stimulus and response. But impossible to use people slow everything down. They pause. They think. They allow silence, not as a tactic, but as a default. When someone asks them for something, they don't say yes or no right away. They say, "Let me think about it," or "I'll get back to you." That pause does two things. It protects their nervous system, and it exposes the other person's intention. If someone respects the pause, they respect you. If someone gets annoyed by the pause, they wanted control, not cooperation. The second trait is brutal, and most people struggle with it. They don't over-explain. Over-explaining is emotional leakage. It's fear disguised as politeness, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being judged, fear of losing approval. But people who exploit others don't want your explanation. They want leverage. Every reason you give becomes a point they can attack. That's not a good excuse. You're overreacting. That's not a big deal. So impossible to use people keep their language clean and final. I'm not available. That doesn't work for me. I've decided. No story, no defense, no emotional performance. They understand something most people don't. You don't need to convince someone who respects you. And you can't convince someone who wants to use you. The third trait is where most people fail. They are comfortable being disliked, not hated, not cruel, just not universally approved. They don't panic when someone is disappointed. They don't scramble to fix discomfort they didn't cause. They don't collapse when someone withdraws approval. Because they've learned something early. Disapproval is not danger. Most manipulation works because people confuse the two. They feel tension, guilt, or awkwardness, and their brain screams, "Fix it." So they comply. Impossible to use people let the discomfort exist. They don't argue. They don't justify. They don't chase reconciliation when they've done nothing wrong. They allow others to feel what they feel. And that makes emotional blackmail useless. The fourth trait is subtle but powerful. They regulate their body language. People read your nervous system before they hear your words. Fast speech signals anxiety. Over-smiling signals submission. Constant nodding signals agreement. Impossible to use people move slower. They breathe deeper. They speak less. They hold eye contact without intensity. When someone tries to provoke them, they don't react theatrically. They respond neutrally. Okay, I see. That's your view. This doesn't mean they're passive. It means they don't reward bad behavior with emotional energy. And that's important because manipulators feed on reaction. The fifth trait flips power instantly. They ask questions instead of defending. Most people hear criticism and go into defense mode. They explain. They justify. They try to prove they're good. Impossible to use people do the opposite. They ask calm, precise questions. What do you mean by that? Why is this coming up now? What exactly are you asking for? Questions slow the interaction. They expose intention. They force clarity. And clarity is dangerous to manipulation, because once intention is visible, control loses its mask. The sixth trait separates emotionally strong people from emotionally drained ones. They don't react to disrespect emotionally. Disrespect is a test. It's bait. The goal is to see whether you'll explode, apologize, or shrink. Impossible to use people don't do any of that. They address disrespect once, calmly. Don't speak to me like that. That's not acceptable. If it continues, I'm leaving. Then they follow through. No lectures, no arguments, no repeated warnings. They understand that respect isn't negotiated. It's enforced through consistency. The seventh trait is deeper than communication. They have a life structure, goals, routines, standards. They're not endlessly available. They're not constantly responsive. They don't build their identity around being needed. And this is critical, because the easiest people to use are the ones with empty space, empty schedules, empty boundaries, empty self-direction. Impossible to use people don't need chaos to feel alive. They don't need validation to feel worthy. They don't need attention to feel real. And that makes them hard to manipulate. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Manipulators don't target strong people. They target accessible people, people who answer fast, people who feel guilty easily, people who explain themselves endlessly, people who mistake kindness for obligation. Once you remove access, control collapses. And that's why people who stop explaining themselves, stop reacting emotionally, stop chasing approval, often become quietly feared. Not because they're cruel, but because they're no longer usable. If this kind of mindset speaks to you, if you want to understand power, psychology, and personal strength without noise, subscribe. This channel is for people who want clarity, not comfort. Because once you become impossible to use, your entire life changes.